April 22nd, open admin meeting, not a formal open session, just administrative meeting to hear what our budget is. But still, I'd like to start the meeting, we'd like to start the meeting like we always do with pledge allegiance and a moment of silence. We're close enough?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
This year, we did a lot of the budget sessions in closed admin, and we had scheduled some open admin, but we actually got done with the proposed budget before we got to the open admin session. So I think we had one open session at the beginning, so for a lot of people, you're going to see all we've done over the past month to get the budget ready, and then they'll share with you at the end what happens from here on till the approval of the budget. And the commissioners, does anybody want to say anything before we start? Ted?
Hey, sound like the song? I think so.
Yeah.
Greg said it would take a minute.
You have to be smarter than the microphone.
Well, the light's on.
No one's home.
There you
Hey, well,
We have,
Yeah,
we have money in the budget for a microphone?
I was just going to call for you.
Is that it? It was working before. I was down here when it was working. Battery die?
all right, well, tell you what, I was gonna stand because we have audiences in two directions, but I'll just sit down. Sorry that you're all at my back.
And then hopefully we'll have another mic
It's my better side anyway.
till you get going.
Okay, so we're here to talk about the fiscal year 26 proposed budget and our plans for fiscal years 26 through 31. This presentation is not an attempt to cover everything. Okay, we're good. I'm going to talk about what's changing, what's interesting. Of course, not everybody thinks the same things are interesting, so these are the things I thought were interesting. Trying to give it information to help people understand the individual actions in a larger context. And important to point out, this is the point in the process where this is the commissioner's budget that they're offering to the public. So what are we going to cover? How did we get here? The starting point is the existing budget and the plans that are already in place. Commissioners adopted last spring. Then we're taking any information we have since then, reacting to changed circumstances. Budget Office put together a recommended budget as a starting point for the commissioners. We're going to talk about commissioner actions. What are the specific budget decisions that were made as you developed this proposed budget? Talk about state actions. What the state does has a lot of impact on Carroll County, and often because of the difficult timing of their budget process and our budget process, we don't know what they're going to do sometimes when we need to react. We're going to talk about changes from the current budget and current plan. Look at highlights of some of the budgets. And when I say highlights, we could spend hours and hours going through everything in the budgets. This is an attempt to give people a quick look at what's in the budget or not. The full budget will be online in the near future. People can go in and look at it in as great detail as they would like. Then we also talk about some highlights of the capital budget. So let's get into the budget and plans. First, talk about the commissioner actions. Commissioners added to the school system $5.8 million. That's on top of the $7.2 million that was already in the recommended budget, so a total increase from 25 to 26 of $13 million. Carroll County Public Library, commissioners changed beginning in fiscal year 27, the growth assumption from 3% a year to 4% a year. Public safety pension. This is the pension that affects law enforcement, corrections, and the employees of Department of Fire and EMS. Now, the commissioners had already built in $2 million a year in anticipation of making changes. So what actually happened this year was a decision on what those benefit changes were going to be. Disability benefits changed from 45% for catastrophic disability and 35% for non-catastrophic to 66.6% in either case. The benefit multiplier that determines the pension amount goes from 2.1 to 2.5%, and employee contributions will go from 8% to 9% of their salaries. Sheriff's Office, commissioners included one-time funding of $500,000 for a replacement armored personnel carrier. Now, this, of course, is for the benefit of the sheriff, but actually shows up in the fleet management budget in Department of Public Works. State's Attorney, commissioners added an additional $200,000 for 2.5% salary increase beyond what was already built into the budget. And for the State's Attorney headquarters, commissioners added $13.4 million, and they replaced $13 million of what had been planned bonds to fund this project with cash. That will save approximately $1.1 million a year in debt service. Fire and EMS added $600,000 for an additional ambulance replacement. There were already two in the budget. This is a third. And this is an area where, as we work our way through this transition, one of the things we still need to work on is what does the ambulance replacement schedule look like over time? And the commissioners added 2 EMT firefighter positions and 2 paramedic firefighter positions. They also upgraded 12 existing positions called Chase Paramedics. This will give them supervisory responsibility that they don't have now. Commissioners added $3 million for Slacks Road. A federal and state collaboration is going to build a veterans home down in the Eldersburg area on Slacks Road. Slacks Road is a fairly narrow road, not really set up for much traffic. We don't have engineering designs yet, but this is money put aside toward making improvements to the road. Rec and Parks, commissioners added a maintenance specialist position in the community park portion of Rec and Parks and funded installation of air conditioning in the Hoshawa cabins. And in a new approach, the commissioners added $4.8 million of cash, general fund tax dollars, to Crim Gold for an expansion. And I say new approach. Historically, we have done our park development with program open space and impact fees. This was a response from the commissioners to the need for additional space, and they decided to go beyond our historical approach. Economic development, the commissioners eliminated ongoing funding to the Heart of the Civil War Heritage Area and added a stormwater engineering position in planning and land management. And when I say added, we've actually had this position for probably a couple years now, but it was originally included with the idea that it was temporary. The commissioners agreed that the need for the position was great enough to make it a permanent change. Agricultural land preservation, commissioners added $1 million a year in cash. So that's on top of the $1 million from the state, our $1.3 million match for the state funding, and ag transfer tax funding of about $100,000 a year. For commissioner employees, sheriff, courts, state's attorney, they built in a 5% salary increase. Use of fund balance in fiscal year 26. When we talk about fund balance, is what people usually think of as surplus. You know, in any year, if things go as they should, there will be more revenue collected than we counted on, and we will spend less than we said we are able to, leaving money at the end of the year. That money can be used in a future budget, but it doesn't have to be immediately used. We did use $22.3 million of it for the state's attorney's headquarter capital project. And something else that's new, and this I think is a really good thing for fiscal planning and fiscal security. The commissioners are going to set aside 5% in fund balance, not to be earmarked for any purpose, but to be available if situation leads to the need. And that need could be something like a sudden downturn in revenues, mandates from the state or federal government that we didn't expect and hadn't planned for, some expenditure we hadn't planned for, or even, I hope this doesn't come up again, but something like COVID, where we were actually planning for a severe reduction in revenues between federal actions and things happening with revenues that we didn't expect. We didn't end up needing any place to go. But if that had played out differently, the idea that we'd have had this money sitting there would have given the commissioners time to be able to react to say, how do we want to deal with this over a multi-year period of time rather than having to react right in the moment. State budget. Mentioned a little bit earlier, what happens at the state matters a lot to us. When the state has a budget problem, the county has a budget problem too, because we know we will be part of their solution. And in a kind of multi-step sort of thing, also going to mention what's happening at the federal government right now. And this is going to come up in other places during the budget. There's a lot more we don't know about what federal changes are going to mean than we do know. This is continuing to play out. I can't pretend that we have planned for it in this budget because we just don't know enough. But on the state budget, it is possible, if not likely, that choices made at the federal level are going to affect the state budget, possibly by billions of dollars. And go back what I said a little bit earlier, when the state has a budget problem, we have a budget problem. So this is not just something for the state to be concerned about, we also will have to be concerned. So state funding to our governmental partners. Carroll County Public Schools, about $197 million, $8.5 million increase. Important to point out here that much of this increase is tied to blueprint legislation. This does not give the school system a lot of flexibility. They just have to use it to comply with blueprint. Carroll Community College, $15 million, more than $1 million increase. The community college with state funding has been kind of the good news story in recent years. In 3 out of the last 4 years, they've had bigger increases from the state than what we typically would look for. Carroll County Public Library, about $1.5 million, not a major increase. Historically, the library, he's used the state funding for buying materials. Health Department, almost $5 million, an increase of $300,000. And this kind of goes the other way. The state is shifting some costs to the county. First, in connection with Carroll County Public Schools, $2.5 million toward pensions. People have heard me talk about this many times. And this goes back 10 or so years where the state first gave counties some responsibility for funding state pensions. I think the whole idea is totally flawed. This is a state pension system. They set the rules, they make the investments. We have absolutely no role in running the system. The pensions are going to people who don't report to the commissioners. We don't set their salaries. So again, county has no role in this other than the state has generously allowed us to participate in funding the costs. So we're already funding $7 or $8 million. They're now adding $2.5 million to that. When they did this the first time, I was worried that more was coming, and we actually went longer than I expected before we came back to it. But come back to it, they did. Now that they've done it a second time, my worries increase. Once you've done it twice, it's going to be a whole lot easier to do it the third time. And in connection with Carroll Community College, they're also shifting some of the pension costs. This is fairly minor as costs go, $115,000. $115,000 is a lot of money, but relative to the size of our budget doesn't move the needle. But this is also a worry for me because we have not participated in the community college's portion of the pension at all. So this is the first opening of the door here. And again, like with the school system, how long till they come back and give us more of the obligation? So money coming from the state to the commissioners. This is money that they actually do get to make choices with. Highway user revenue, $4.3 million, up $500,000. Now, this sounds like good news, and in a short-term way it is, but this is a place where some context is important. 10, 12 years ago, we were getting almost $12 million of highway user revenue. So even put aside how much that might have grown if things had gone on as they were back then, even just saying $12 million, $4.3 million, clearly we're getting a lot less money. And a lot of people don't know, counties maintain more roads than the state does, but we are no longer participating in this state shared tax revenue in the way we once did. Now, next year, we're expecting a comparable level of funding. When I say expecting, it's built into current legislation. But the year after that, fiscal year 28, this drops by about $1 million. Police aid is flat. Program open space is another state shared tax that we use for our parks. $700,000, a decrease of $200,000. Now, this was not actually a policy shift. This was a reaction to the size of the pot decreasing. Although we did get a piece of good news in legislation. 25% of the program open space we get from the state was required to be used for land acquisition, which was becoming a difficult thing for us because we're struggling to keep up with the inventory of parks that we have now. The idea of adding to that was just going to make it even more difficult. The state passed legislation this year that will allow us to use land acquisition money for park development and maintenance. So this is a plus. With current projections, it's about $200,000 a year that we'll have extra to use. And we also have some that's accumulated over time, approximately $900,000 that we'll have available. Okay, I'm going to look at the proposed op plan now. And for people who are new to listening to this, Carroll County, in addition to adopting a budget every year, which we have to do by law, we look 5 years further out to say what are our expectations for the future based on the choices that we're making today. So we take our revenues that we have proposed for FY26. We have assumptions for how we expect our revenues to grow, and you can see that going across the years. Similarly with expenditures, we know what we're proposing in fiscal year '26. We make assumptions about how those are going to change over time. Now, we would want this op plan to go down to the bottom line and have more projected revenues than projected expenditures. That's not where we are right now. Based on the choices we're making today and the assumptions we're making about the future, and of course I have to say the assumptions are assumptions. I don't know that they're going to be right. But based on those assumptions, for the 6 years, we will have more planned expenditures than we have revenues. That will have to be addressed over time. You know, if nothing else, as we get to each of those years, we have to balance them. We don't have any choice. Now, some people looking at this will say, oh, I have an easy solution for you. Just stop spending so much. And mechanically, that works. But it's not really useful just to talk about what are we spending. You have to think about what are we spending it on. If we spend less, it means we're doing less of something. What services are we going to eliminate or do less of? That becomes a much more difficult conversation and one that's hard to find agreement across the people in the county. I'm going to talk how have things changed from the plan we are working with today. And pretty much the day we adopt a budget, the day we adopt a plan, things start to change. The world moves on, and we spend the whole year trying to collect, okay, what's changed since that day in May. So things that decrease from that plan. So these are things that put us in a better position. Board of Education debt service. This is mostly a timing question. It's not that money is going to be saved over the long term, but in certain years, it improved our position. Debt service for the county. Some of this is also about timing, but there's also what I mentioned a little bit earlier. We replaced $13 million of planned bonds with cash. That improved your bottom line by more than $1 million a year. Then fire EMS. We have billing revenue. When there's an ambulance transport, we are able to collect some revenue. Because this is a legally restricted revenue, it exists as its own fund. Yes, when we're talking about the operating budget, what we're actually talking in accounting purposes is the general fund. There is a EMS billing revenue fund that sits apart. That revenue has to stay there, and we have to put appropriate expenditures, meaning tied to EMS, to use that revenue. This is still relatively new for us, and we have a much better handle now on how much revenue we believe we can expect. That led to moving more expenditures from the general fund to the EMS revenue fund than we had planned for in fiscal year '25. So that improved the bottom line. And, it gets complicated trying to work through all this, but just for people who are listening, the big idea here is we will never collect enough EMS billing revenue to fully pay for the cost of EMS. So what this does, though, is allow us to reduce our dependence on general fund tax dollars and use this money that is specifically dedicated to this purpose. Other decreases from the op plan, OPEB, other post-employment benefits. This is retiree health care. And this is another complicated one because we have things going in two different directions. First, we were able to reduce our funding because of our last actuarial study. On the other hand, we funded the minimum that we had to in fiscal year '25 because we thought we were in a position to reduce our funding. So that's going back in '26. So we both have increase and decrease. So it's a net decrease, but it's a complicated picture when you dig in. Transfer to solid waste. This is an enterprise fund. In theory, it should have its own set of revenues and expenditures that, like the billing fund I was just talking about, are sitting aside from the general fund. As things work, the solid waste fund is not able to support itself, so there is a transfer from the general fund every year. We had two things happen, though, that will allow us to reduce the size of that transfer for fiscal 26. One was investment income, money that we have on hand that's related to solid waste. The fund gets the benefit of the income that comes in, and fiscal year 25 was a strong year for our investments. Hard to say how fiscal year 26 will play out in the end, but right now we have a very different story, and we'll be talking about this differently in the next budget, I think. The other was the commissioners approved a tipping fee increase. This is what haulers pay when they drop their solid waste at the landfill. And then transfer to transit. We got a bit more in a grant than we were expecting, so that allowed us to reduce the general fund transfer that was going to go there. This is another place to mention federal funding. There is federal money in our transit system. We don't know anything right now. We haven't tried to react to it, but it's certainly possible that we will see a loss of federal funding. And then locally, we will have choices to make. And I have just captured those numbers here. In this case, red is a good thing. It means they're negatives, but they were negatives against what we were planning, so it put us in a better position. Now let's look at the other side, increases from that plan. These are things that put us in a worse position. State pension cost for schools, mentioned this already. The pension cost for the community college. Both of those used up money, not any choice the commissioners made, but took money off the table that could have gone to other purposes. In public works, electricity. Many people listening are probably aware that we are expecting significant increases in electricity costs. The county is affected like that, just like a home is. We have built into 26 a 25% increase and a 20% increase in fiscal year 27. Now, we don't know those numbers. When we find out what actually happens, we will react to that and adapt. But that's what we've built in based on what understanding we've been able to get. And comptroller, another state shift. Haven't mentioned this one yet. State Department of Assessments and Taxation. Much like the pension, I would argue this doesn't make sense. This is a state agency run by the state employees. We have absolutely no role in the work that they do. We didn't always participate in this. Again, going back 10 or 12 years, we've been funding half of the cost of this operation. New legislation this year has now given us 90% of the cost. The state's reasoning on this is that the work they do is for the benefit of people in the county, which is true, but is also true of almost everything the state does. Their constituents are our constituents. If you start to make that argument, I'm not sure exactly where that ends. But for this one, it's the argument that's on the table.
And
That
Ted,
added
I'm sorry, how much was the increase for SSTAT this year?
$600,000.
Thank you.
So again, that's $600,000 we're spending without any choice that the commissioners made. And actually, if you think everything you're looking at on this page are not choices we made, they're just things we had to do. Other increases, risk, this is about insurance costs. And this is probably something that's going to remain on the table in the near future. If you think about the wildfires in California, the hurricane damage in North Carolina and Florida, insurers are up against some big changes. And something that most people don't think about or maybe don't even know about, the direct insurers also buy insurance. They go to reinsurers. So they're pushing some of the risk on other companies. Those reinsurers are looking at some big losses in this last year. It's hard to imagine that that's not going to lead to changes that are going to impact us. Technology, this is not something new. This is a growing problem for us. The costs of providing and protecting our technology continue to grow. There's lots of things to it. I mentioned two things here. Cybersecurity. Most people are at least vaguely aware of some government jurisdiction that has been hacked and held up for ransom. Now, whether you pay the ransom or pay the cost of rebuilding what you lost, the costs can be significant. We spend a growing amount of money on cybersecurity, trying to keep ourselves from being put into that position. And it's a hard thing to think about. How much do you spend? Clearly, you can't have a blank check. You can't say spend whatever. But where do you say that's enough? That's too much. Where do we say, okay, we're willing to take that risk? And we say software maintenance, but this is kind of the shift of the business model from the days when we owned our hardware and owned our software, and we used it until we bought something new. We do very little of that now. Almost everything we're doing is leasing from companies who are providing this. So we say maintenance, this is about maintenance and upgrades and just the basic rental costs, basically. And this is growing and is a growing concern for me. And the basic problem here is this is a business model that works for the people providing the software, not for the people receiving it. And transfer to capital, this is money we cash. We move from the general fund to another fund. I mentioned AgPres, $1 million a year. That will be going to the capital fund. Krimgold Park, I mentioned $4.8 million. That will be going to the capital fund. That's one-time money. And then the state's attorney headquarters, we have a significant amount of cash moving from the general fund to the capital fund. And similarly to the decreases, here are the increases captured on a chart. Black here is bad. It means it put us in a worse position. So you see there are 3 places where we have a little bit of red. So in those years, those particular things helped us a little bit. So positions included in this FY26 proposed budget. I've mentioned all these before, but here they're captured in one place. Let's hit some of the operating highlights. And because we're coming at things in different directions, some of this will be repetitive. We'll come back to the same things more than once. When people talk about the budget, they're usually thinking about the operating budget or their general fund. Sometimes they're thinking about the capital budget, capital fund. We actually have about a dozen different funds. When you add them all up, that's about $800 million in fiscal year 26, up from $742 in 25. Now, this all funds budget tends to bounce around because some things you are doing here not every year, like the state's attorney's headquarters. It shows up in the capital fund, also in all funds. We won't be budgeting again for that next year. The operating budget or general fund, $581 million, 6.5% increase from fiscal year 25. There's a lot of things going on here, moving in both directions. Just want to remind people of 2 things I talked about. $13 million of this change is the increase going to the school system. That's the biggest thing we fund. And $3 million of this increase are choices the state made, not choices that we made. So county funding to our education, to our governmental partners. First, Carroll County Public Schools, $252 million, an increase of $13 million, or about 5.5%. There's a lot going on in discussions on the school budget, and of course much of this revolves around blueprint legislation and the school system's attempt to comply. The Board of Education actually asked the commissioners for a $57 million increase, which included $44 million specifically tied to blueprint compliance. The idea behind this, and it's really as big a number as it is, and a number I don't see how we possibly could have done, but there is logic behind what they were asking. And the idea here is $44 million is what they believe they need in additional funding to comply with Blueprint without resorting to other negative changes. And those other negative changes have been on the table, out in the public, getting a lot of discussion. That includes eliminating almost 100 positions and moving almost 100 teachers from one school to another. Well, not all 100 from one school, but And if those teacher moves take place, what we'll see is significant class size increases in the schools that they're being taken from. Now, right now, the school system is waiting on a waiver from Blueprint compliance from the state. They were supposed to have taken that up on the 17th. Now they're talking about May the 1st. This is a difficult situation for the school system because if they don't get the waiver, they have a lot of things they need to do with now arguably too little time to do it. If they do give the waiver, we're really looking for a second action here because the waiver for now would only be buying time, leaving the same problem in place. What we hope will happen is that the General Assembly will reconsider exactly what Blueprint requires and maybe make some of these changes unnecessary. But that's an unknown for now. And I do want to mention federal government here again. The school system has employees who are entirely funded with federal funding. That is not directly the county's problem. If they lose funding, you don't have to do something about it, but undoubtedly there will be discussions about the services that are going to be lost, and there will be pressure on the commissioners to do something about it. Community college, $12.8 million, 3% increase. Adult basic education, this is a separate budget also connected to the college, about $200,000. This is flat funding. This is our required match for them to get funding from the state for this program. And I mentioned earlier, state pension shift of $115,000. Library, about $11.5 million. An increased budget to budget of 1.5%, but the commissioners funded one-time money in fiscal year 25. So kind of base budget to base budget, this is a 3% increase. And I mentioned a little bit earlier, beginning in 27, the commissioners changed the growth assumption to 4%. The Community Media Center you see going down 11.5%. Their funding comes from a piece of the cable franchise fee from our contract with Comcast. We've seen a decline in that revenue. That's what you see showing up here. This is something we've been concerned about for truly years. Seems likely this is going to continue to decline. There are going to be some interesting questions for the CMC. Courts, small increase. Sheriff's Office up about 4%. State's Attorney 7.7%. Part of that is I mentioned no, I didn't mention this yet. Yes, I did. The commissioners added some additional funding beyond what was planned for salary increases. And there's also a grant that is not going to be as high as we've had in the past, and the commissioners chose to fill in that gap. Animal control, 3% increase. LOSAP, Length of Service Awards Program. This is a benefit for longtime volunteers in fire and EMS. This is flat from 25. We will have a new actuarial study coming later this year, I think. We'll see what our position looks like. VISA, Volunteer Emergency Services Association, decrease of 3.5%, but this is another one where you have to dig in to understand what's going on. First, there was one-time funding included in 25 that is not included in 26. And as we move through the transition, there are expenditures that historically have been paid by Visa or the companies that are now being paid by the county. So that affects what this number looks like. The important point here is for expenditures that are still in their hands, there's a 3% increase. Citizen Services, our nonprofit service providers, $4.3 million, a little under 2.5% increase. Another place where federal decisions could touch programs here locally. One, I think, of particular interest to us, we have one nonprofit service provider, human services programs are involved in housing efforts, and internally we have in Citizen Services a housing unit. If housing funding changes, that's going to impact what we're able to do here. And it's not a hard leap to say if we're able to do less with housing, homelessness will go up. And, homelessness is a thing that maybe a lot of people don't think about too much until it starts to affect them and they see it around them. So, again, don't know what's going to happen, but at least seems like potential there. Elections, up 6.7%. This is another state agency that we fully fund. Again, no say in their operations. And they basically make decisions and tell us, here's what you need to pay us. In the last 11 years, we've seen this budget go from $250,000 to $2.7 million. Again, I know I keep saying this, but this is not a choice the commissioners made. This is just something we have to do. Conservation of natural resources. There's some state salary increases we have to pay in here, and then there's a truck replacement for soil conservation. Commissioner agencies. So these are people who actually report to you. And that means everything we've talked about, with the exception of fire and EMS, everything we've talked about up to now are agencies who are not actually in your control, but you provide funding to. Public safety, I have 911 on here, but another federal thing I want to talk about, in that same area, we have our emergency management. And we are seeing some grants connected to that go away, some reimbursement money being withheld. There are going to be some questions here, and it becomes, do we come up with additional local tax dollars, or do we not do some of the things that we're doing today? Public Works, small increase. Citizen Services up almost 15%. There's a few important things happening here that are changes largely thrust upon us. We have a grant that we've had for a number of years for some drug treatment beds that is ending, and we are choosing to continue that, so that takes more tax dollars. And then there are two positions in Citizen Services where we felt like we had to change how much of their salaries were being covered by grants, meaning we had to add additional tax dollars. Okay, fire and EMS tried to capture the big picture look in what's in our current operating plan compared to what's in the plan that you're proposing now. We've been through several years of transition now. We think we're getting pretty close to understanding what the costs of running this are. Although I have to say, unless the board agrees to do more things than are built into the plan. Like you added 4 positions this year. If you were to choose to add 4 positions next year, that's not built into this. When we started this transition, we had as part of the budget a line that said new net costs. We were trying to keep visible from where we were to where we're going, how much cost are we adding. Mechanically, that was difficult, and it was, I think, starting to get in the way of even talking about it in a useful way. So if you look at the budget this year, you'll see there is a budget for Fire and EMS administration, there's a budget for fire, there's a budget for EMS, and there's a budget for Visa. That, I think, will be a much better way for us moving forward. But if you try to compare 26 to a previous year, it gets complicated because it's no longer oranges to oranges sort of numbers. You can see the breakout here, and you might look at administration and say, why is there so much money in administration? And the reason is not because there are so many people there. The people are in EMS. It's because we are budgeting right now all the medical costs associated with those people are in administration. All the training costs are in administration. There's a list of things that arguably could be broken out, but right now aren't. And that's something we're still talking about, still thinking through. What does it take to break this out? How much better information do you get? How much more work does it take to get you there? Oh yeah, another big piece, workers' compensation. That's all budgeted in administration. Now, we talked about the EMS Billing Revenue Fund a little bit earlier. That's $8 million in fiscal year '26. And another really important point, we're thinking about how to show this in the budget book. But if you want to know how much EMS costs, you have to look in the Department of Fire and EMS budget, and you have to look at the Billing Revenue Fund to get the total cost, the total we're spending on these activities. Now, that $8 million is built off of what we learned from actuals in this last year, and also from a new pot of money that we have gone after, which will add about $300,000. Another, careful though on federal money. In the basic billing, we figure about 7% of what we get is tied to Medicaid funding. And this $300,000 pot of new money is entirely Medicaid funding. If Medicaid is affected, our revenue is going to be affected. Rec and Parks, increase of about 5.5%. I mentioned a new position as part of that increase. Comptroller up 11.5%. You can thank the state for that change. County Attorney about 5%. Economic Development, an increase of $1 million. This is because the commissioners put one-time $1 million in for a specific economic development project. Management and Budget, 13.5%. This is about the insurance I was talking about earlier. Planning and Land Management, up about 2.5%. Technology Services, we kind of talked about this earlier. And unfortunately, I don't think this is a bad year. I mean, this is just how it's going to be with IT costs. And audio video production up 11%. This is a small budget, and there were a couple of one-time purchases in the mix. It doesn't take very much for it to spike the percent change. Commissioners down 2.5%. They eliminated a position. And no, it wasn't one of the commissioner positions for anybody. Human Resources up 6%. We've been struggling in recent years, partially to retain people and a lot in recruiting people. We've upped our efforts. So there's been a little bit of money added in Human Resources to facilitate them trying to get longer lines waiting to get to our jobs. Health and fringe benefits. At this point, this is all budgeted in one spot. Before the end of the year, this gets distributed over all of the budgets. This is up 34%, which is another, it's not what it sounds like. Remember I talked about OPEB and how we funded it at the minimum? We are funding that back in a normal way again, which added some millions of dollars to the budget. Now, our claims are growing. We have it built in at 6.25%. We've had very good experience for a number of years. We've seen a little bit of growth, but still, I think, a pretty comfortable place. But next year, you won't see this kind. The 26 budget, where the money's coming from. Capital fund tends to be a little lumpy. Unlike the operating budget, it doesn't always move in a relatively smooth line. Just depends on what projects you have this year or don't. Schools, $60.5 million in fiscal year '26. Not all that is county money, though. You see addition to Freedom Elementary School, addition to Sykesville Middle School, HVAC and roof replacements that we are always working on. See almost $19 million for kindergarten and pre-kindergarten additions. This is largely another part of Blueprint. Blueprint extended pre-K services to more kids. Unless the school system just happened to have a lot of space sitting around, there's not space for them. And in Carroll County, there was not space to just bring them in. So we're doing a lot of pre-K additions. Along the way, we're also catching up on 4 kindergarten, full-day kindergarten additions that we have never gotten to. I forget how many years it's been since the state mandated full-day kindergarten. And we did a bunch of additions back then. You know, and the state is participating in these projects, but they didn't increase the size of the pot for doing this. So all that means is where we're getting money for a pre-K project, it's money we could have gotten for some other project. So again, we're choosing these in the context of having to comply with Blueprint now, but this is not a choice we necessarily would have made. If you look at the whole plan, you see the additions I mentioned, HVAC and roof continue on, and then a couple smaller projects that are ongoing. You know, sometimes I get advice on the capital budget, you know, talk about the pressures on the capital. Again, people will say, well, just spend less. Don't put all those projects in. And we don't put all those projects in. Like, there's often more that doesn't go in than does. And as we go through the capital, I'm going to hit on some things that are not in. This is not the whole list of things that didn't make it in, but just some that might get it some attention. An addition at Robert Moten, modernizations to Liberty High School and William Winchester Elementary School. And yeah, the modernization question is an important one. We are not doing a lot of modernizations or replacements. Now, we recently did East Middle School, have a brand new East Middle School. Before that, though, you'd have to go back to Mount Airy Middle School as the last full modernization we did. And before that, you'd have to go back to North Carroll Middle School. I don't know how many years it's been, but that's been a while. And it's not that we're not doing anything, but we're not doing full projects. We're doing kind of piecemeal work on the schools. When I talk about the roofs and HVAC systems, sometimes windows, electrical systems, that's how we're trying to renew schools. But it's hard to see us getting to a place where we can take on much in full modernizations or replacements. If the board decides to, you know, take a look at Liberty High School, there's not a hard price on this yet, but we're talking about something in excess of $100 million. And maybe we could pull that off. But if we did, between what we can expect from the state and what you have available, when I say available, for many years we've committed 9.09% of our income tax, our local income tax, to the school construction program. Doing Liberty would eat up the state funding for some years and would eat up the funding you have available for some years, which means those other things we're talking about, you know, doing roofs, doing HVACs, doing additions that aren't already planned, there wouldn't be funding for them. And, you know, it's a big problem without an answer. I don't know what to tell you the way to fix that is. Conservation, I mentioned AgPres already. NPDS, this is meeting our federal and state water quality regulations. And as we look through further into the CIP, you just see those same things recurring. Roads. The big money is in taking care of the roads we already have. There are a couple new pieces here, and neither of these are new roads, but extensions, connections of roads that already exist. And looking at roads out through the CIP, all of this is just ongoing every year stuff with the exception of the Slacks Road project that I mentioned earlier. Some things that aren't in. A couple road projects, and Public Works would like to add or replace some of their salt storage facilities. Bridges, not going to go through all this. We always have a lot of bridge projects going on. This is another federal concern. Most of our bridges are 80% funded with federal money. If that changes, we have some interesting questions to deal with. And if you look out beyond 26, you see the list of bridges just continues. Rec and Parks. Crimgold is the big news. I mentioned that a little bit earlier. There is a relatively small project for pickleball courts at Leicester. The rest is kind of ongoing business. We have pavilion and parking replacement at Piney Run. Looking out further in the plan, there are some of the things that continue on, but we also see light replacement and pavilion replacement at Freedom, Piney Run boathouse replacement. Some things that aren't in, Cape Horn Park paving and Freedom Park paving. And today's not the day for it, but just bring this up for your future thought. You know, I told you because of the change in law about land acquisition funding, we have some money that you didn't expect to have. Basically, two paths you could choose to take here. One, in the short term, well, first, in the long term, just means we're going to have more money. We can rethink some of the projects. In the short term, though, you added $4.8 million of cash for Freedom. Crimgold, yes. The 900,000 that we have accumulated and possibly another 200,000 on top of that could replace cash you put on Crimgold and put that back into your fund balance. Or this can all go to reconsidering other projects that we have not been able to include because there wasn't enough funding. A lot of this is business as usual. Election software. You know, the state makes choices on software and hardware for elections. Now, fortunately, they don't make us pay the entire cost of this. They do participate half-half, generally speaking, on these things. But again, not a choice that we get to make. The government complex infrastructure, $4 million. This is existing funding. You adopted this in another budget when we were contemplating a parking garage. This is moving some of the money from that project. Piney Run Dam rehabilitation. You've heard that we're hoping for some grant funding there. There's another one where federal decisions change that. And in this case, we're not counting on federal funding. We're just hoping for it. Then looking out through the plan, again, business as usual. There's nothing new in here. Things not in. Carroll Community College, Tech Center and Athletic Facility, restroom and elevator, workforce development, courthouse annex building renovation. Now, at some point, we are going to spend some money at the courthouse annex. When the state's attorney's headquarters is done and the state's attorney vacates the annex, we will have to make some changes. And they've requested a new supervised visitation center. We have one. I know it's not everything they would like it to be, but we've put a good deal of work into it in recent years, trying to make it as good as we can. Not a pressing, well, I shouldn't say it, depends on who you talk to. Facilities would like a new building separate from other operations out at the maintenance center. This one, I could say, is not pressing. Just want to keep it visible. At some point, we probably are going to need a new home for 911. Transit would like an addition to their building. You know, we've talked about this before. We built that building very quickly with some federal money that was available, and we built it to the amount of money that we had. And we will need a detention center someday. And there are some other smaller changes that sheriff would like to see at the existing detention center. Senior centers, there's requests for projects at Tawnytown and Westminster. Library, requests at Eldersburg, North Carroll, and Westminster. And Eldersburg, what they would like is much like what we talked about with schools, is either a full modernization or replacement. Enterprise funds, this has come up a couple times in different ways, but remember, enterprise funds, standalone or should stand alone, have their own set of revenues and expenditures. There are some places where it doesn't quite work that way. Airport is one where it does, although with the runway project, we will be facing some challenges on keeping it that way. These are all just the things that happen every year. Utilities, this is a place where it does work as it should. There are always utility projects, different things every year, but we're always doing something. Look out through 31. Airport and fiber network just continue. Utility projects, there will be more, they just change. Commissioners did approve rate changes in solid waste tipping fee. They approved rate changes for water and sewer. Then rest of the process. This evening, I'll be at Exploration Commons to share this same information with whoever shows up. All these meetings are at 7 o'clock. Exploration Commons tonight, Eldersburg tomorrow, April 23rd, Mount Airy, Thursday, April 24th, Tawnytown, April 29th, which is a Tuesday, I believe, and North Carroll on the 30th. If I'm right about the Tuesday, then it's on Wednesday. The proposed budget should be online. Projected timeframe?
Probably early next week.
Early next week. And if people have questions about this presentation, or if you eventually get deeper into it, I have contact information coming up shortly. Glad to take your questions. If what you want to talk about is, I'm in favor of this, or I'm not in favor of this, I'd say those are better directed to the commissioners, because they're the ones who will be making the decisions. But if you want to know where to find information, what does this information mean? Why does this number look the way it does? Okay. You
I
can,
don't plan to be here
Ted,
then.
the,
contact me.
after the public hearing, everything's open session after that.
Yes.
Nothing else will be closed admin, so.
Right.
And so they're all, the public hearing obviously is public comment. The work sessions will not have public comment, but our normal open sessions will.
And as Heidi just pointed out, the budget adoption is at 10 o'clock a.m., not p.m.
Hey,
Are these,
Ted, we can make it 10 PM.
are these slides going to be posted as well?
Yes.
I imagine you're gonna hand them out for your evening discussions, but if we can post them,
Yeah, we will post the presentation. Yeah.
Yes, Chris will be posting the presentation immediately following this.
And then here's the contact information that was promised. Okay, so that's what I have, unless there's something more you wanted to say or ask.
I want to thank you and the budget staff. This area was full in our closed meetings with budget people answering questions and helping us get through the budget. I just want to thank everybody for that. I want to thank the public. We don't have a lot here today. I wasn't sure what we'd get today, but thank you for being interested, and follow the TED shows and the public hearing, and let us know what you think. Guys, anything else you want to say?
I think you covered it.
I think I covered it, okay. Ted, anything else?
Nope.
So we say, thank you very much, and we're done.